Helmand Province, Afghanistan, 2009. A NATO patrol is moving along a canal when the first shot cracks past. One round, aimed from over 600 meters out. The men go down into cover and answer with everything a modern rifle squad carries. And almost none of it matters. Their short-barreled carbines, superb inside 300 meters, simply do not reach that far with any authority. The man shooting at them is beyond their effective range, and they are inside his. He is not a trained sniper. He is an ordinary fighter with no ghillie suit and no spotter, holding a long, slim, half-century-old Soviet rifle with a wooden stock and a 4-power scope. And with that one obsolete-looking weapon, he is pinning down an entire squad of the best-equipped soldiers on Earth. That rifle was the Dragunov, and the scene repeated itself so many times in Iraq and Afghanistan that the British Army declared an emergency and rushed out to buy a rifle it did not have. A rifle that could do what the Dragunov had been doing since 1963. If stories like this are why you're here, take a second and subscribe to the channel. It is the one thing that keeps them coming. And here's the strange thing about the Dragunov. It is the most produced sniper rifle in the history of the world. And it is not really a sniper rifle at all. It shoots groups a serious American precision rifle would be ashamed of. It was designed that way on purpose, by a quiet Russian engineer who built Olympic target rifles, and who understood something about real war that the West would take almost 50 years to accept. NATO did not just fail to copy the Dragunov. For decades, NATO refused to understand it, and paid for that refusal in 2 wars. So how did a deliberately imperfect rifle become the most produced sniper rifle on Earth? Why did the finest armies in the world have no answer to it for nearly half a century? And what did a Soviet target shooting champion understand about war that the Pentagon didn't? To understand the Dragunov, you have to start with the man, because the rifle is, in a very direct way, a portrait of him. Yevgeny Fyodorovich Dragunov was born in 1920 in Izhevsk, a gray industrial city in the Ural Mountains that had been making Russian weapons since the Napoleonic Wars, the same city and the same world as a colleague of his named Mikhail Kalashnikov. Dragunov came from a family of gunmakers, and during the Second World War, he served as a senior armorer. Not a designer of new weapons, but the man who repaired them. Thousands of rifles coming back from the front, broken, frozen, fouled, abused in every way a battlefield can abuse a machine. It is hard to imagine a better education. A designer learns what looks good on paper. An armorer learns what actually breaks. When the war ended, Dragunov went home to Izhevsk, joined the Arms Design Bureau, and spent the next 15 years building target rifles, precision competition rifles for Soviet marksmen, and eventually the rifles that carried Soviet biathlon shooters to Olympic gold. He was a competitive marksman himself, a man who understood accuracy not as a number in a table, but as a feeling in the hands. Remember that combination, because there has almost never been another designer like him. A man who spent the war learning how rifles fail, and the peace learning how rifles hit. Both halves went into what came next. In the late 1950s, the Soviet Army came to the design bureaus with an unusual request. It wanted a rifle no Western army had ever fielded. A semi-automatic precision rifle that would go not to an elite marksman in a ghillie suit, but to one ordinary soldier in every platoon. The thinking behind that request is the heart of this whole story. The new generation of assault rifles, the Kalashnikov included, had bought enormous close-range firepower at a price. Beyond 300 or 400 meters, an ordinary rifle squad simply could not hit anyone. There was a gap from 400 meters out to 800 where the enemy was visible, shootable in principle, and completely safe in practice. The Western answer to that gap was the sniper. a specially selected, specially trained two-man team with a slow bolt-action rifle, operating apart from the infantry, hunting particular targets. A scalpel, superb and scarce. The Soviet answer was entirely different. Do not make a few perfect marksmen, they reasoned. Give every platoon a man with a rifle that reaches 800 meters, keep him in the squad, moving with everyone else, and let him simply delete the targets that matter. The officer, the machine gunner, the radio operator, the moment they appear. The West would eventually call that man the designated marksman. But in 1958, the West had no name for him, because the West had no such man and no such rifle. Building that rifle was a genuinely hard problem. It had to be accurate to 800 meters, but semi-automatic, fast for a second and third shot, which no bolt gun could give. And it had to be light enough to run with all day, and rugged enough to be treated like any other infantry weapon, because that is exactly what it would be. Match rifle accuracy, assault rifle toughness, in one weapon. Nobody on Earth had done it. The Army opened a design competition in 1958, and it became a 5-year duel between 3 teams. One was led by Sergei Simonov, a living legend, the designer of the SKS carbine, the politically connected favorite. Another was led by Alexander Konstantinov, whose rifle was simpler and cheaper, and the third was led by the quiet target rifleman from Izhevsk. The trials were brutal in the Soviet style. Mud, dust, frost, sand, thousands of rounds. Simonov's entry was, at bottom, a scaled-up SKS, and it could not hold the accuracy. Konstantinov's was cheaper, less accurate, less durable, less reliable. Dragunov's rifle shot straighter, lasted longer, and kept working. Those 5 years nearly broke him. Every change that made the rifle tougher made it less accurate, and every change that made it more accurate made it more fragile. The armorer and the marksman argued at the same workbench, and the rifle that emerged was the truce between them. On the 3rd of July, 1963, the Soviet Army formally adopted the SVD, Sniperskaya Vintovka Dragunova, Dragunov's sniper rifle. The competition rifle builder from Izhevsk had beaten the most famous name in Soviet small arms and armed the largest army on Earth. And here is where the rifle itself becomes fascinating, because almost everything about it is a deliberate compromise, made by a man who knew precisely which kinds of perfection do not matter in a war. From across a room, the SVD looks like a stretched Kalashnikov, and generations of Western observers dismissed it as exactly that. It is nothing of the kind. The Kalashnikov drives itself with a long-stroke gas piston, a heavy steel rod, rigidly attached to the bolt carrier, slamming back and forth through the whole action with every shot. Magnificent for reliability, terrible for accuracy. All that violently moving mass shakes the rifle exactly when it needs to be still. Dragunov, the target shooter, would not accept it. His rifle uses a short-stroke piston, a small, light piston that gives the bolt carrier a sharp little shove and stops. Far less moving steel, far less disturbance, a rifle that stays calm through the shot. Match rifle thinking, wrapped in battlefield metal. The rest of the rifle obeys the same master. A long barrel reaching for every meter of range, a skeleton stock carved hollow to save weight, a crisp trigger no Kalashnikov ever had, and no automatic fire at all. Ever. Because one aimed shot that hits beats 30 that spray. Then there is the cartridge, and it is one of the great ironies of the story. The SVD fires the 7.62 by 54 rimmed. The ancient full-power Russian round, introduced in 1891 for the Mosin rifle of the Tsars, the same vintage of rimmed ammunition Britain was clinging to when it curved the Brenz magazine. It is, to this day, the oldest cartridge still in frontline military service anywhere in the world. Dragunov shaped his 10-round magazine around that awkward old rim because the round hit hard, reached far, and existed in mountains across the Soviet Union. Good enough, everywhere, forever. That was worth more than perfect. On top of the rifle went something that, in 1963, genuinely was ahead of the world: the PSO-1 optical sight. 4-power magnification, an illuminated reticle for bad light, a bullet drop dial for range, and a clever stadia scale in the glass that measured a standing man and told the shooter instantly how far away he was. At a time when the standard American infantry rifle wore iron sights and nothing else, every Soviet platoon fielded a man with an illuminated, range-finding optic as standard issue. And then there is the number that Western experts sneered at for half a century: the accuracy. A good SVD shoots roughly 2 minutes of angle. Any serious American target shooter would call that mediocre. And that is precisely the point. The SVD was never meant to put 5 rounds through one hole. It was meant to put one fast round into a man-sized target at 600 meters, from a dirty rifle held by a cold soldier seconds after the target appeared, with a second shot instantly behind the first, and to do that for decades, in Arctic frost and desert grit, with zero pampering. Dragunov could have built a far more accurate rifle in his sleep. He had shelves of medals to prove it. He built exactly as much accuracy as war required, and spent everything else on speed, toughness, and reach. It is the most disciplined decision in the history of precision rifles, and it is why the men who carried it trusted it like a hammer. So the SVD went out to the platoons, 1 marksman in each, and the Soviet army quietly acquired a capability no NATO force possessed. Every infantry unit on Earth's largest front could reach out to 800 meters on demand. And then the rifle began to travel. It went wherever Soviet influence went. It fought in Vietnam, where a captured Dragunov became one of the most prized American trophies of the war. It fought across the Middle East, in Angola, in Afghanistan, against the Mujahideen, and then, in the way of such things, in the hands of the Mujahideen. China reverse engineered it. Iran built it. It served in well over 60 armies, and when Yugoslavia tore itself apart in the 1990s, the long skeleton-stalked silhouette rested on the windowsills of Sarajevo. Count the licensed and unlicensed copies together, and the Dragunov became what it remains today: the most produced precision rifle in military history. One detail our audience will appreciate: the Romanian PSL, the rifle most Americans have actually handled with a Dragunov silhouette, is not a true SVD at all. It is a scaled-up Kalashnikov pattern rifle built to look the part. The shape spread even further than the rifle itself. Through all those years, the West watched the SVD, cataloged it, captured it, and fundamentally misread it. Western analysts judged it as a sniper rifle, found it wanting against their own precision bolt guns, and filed it away as another crude Soviet compromise. The Americans flirted with the idea themselves. The M21, an accurized M14 with a scope, served in Vietnam. But it was an improvisation, not a doctrine, and it faded. NATO kept its faith in the scalpel, a few elite sniper teams, superbly trained, and its ordinary rifle squads stayed exactly as blind beyond 400 meters as they had been in 1958. And then, NATO went to war in Iraq and Afghanistan, and the problem introduced itself personally. The enemy there had no satellites and no thermal optics. What he had, in enormous numbers, was the SVD and its copies, and open country. In Iraq's cities, insurgent marksmen with Dragunovs became a daily terror. The most notorious of them, the propaganda sniper the insurgents called Juba, became a legend built around that rifle. In Afghanistan, firefights routinely opened at 500 and 600 meters, distances at which the West's short 5.56 carbines simply ran out of authority. NATO squads found themselves in exactly the position the Soviet planners had imagined half a century earlier: visible, shootable, and unable to answer. What happened next is the quiet confession at the center of this story. The United States dusted off its retired M14 battle rifles from the 1950s, rebuilt them with modern stocks and glass, and pushed them back out to the squads because it had nothing else ready. Then it fielded a purpose-built semi-automatic marksman rifle, the M110, and Britain, the Army of the Lee Enfield and the L1A1, declared an urgent operational requirement in 2009 and emergency purchased the L129 A1 sharpshooter, rushing it to Afghanistan in 2010, where it became one of the most beloved weapons British troops carried. Do the arithmetic. The SVD was adopted on the 3rd of July, 1963. The British Army fielded its equivalent in 2010, 47 years. That is how long it took NATO not to copy the Dragunov, but merely to concede that Yevgeny Dragunov had been right. Today, every serious Western Army fields designated marksmen in its squads. It is now considered obvious. It was obvious in Izhevsk in 1958. And here the story turns, though the Dragunov's ending is unlike any other weapon we have covered, because in a real sense, it has refused to have one. Yevgeny Dragunov died in 1991, in the last months of the Soviet Union he had armed. A modest man to the end, far less famous than his neighbor Kalashnikov, though the world's armies would ultimately imitate them both. Russia has at last designed a successor meant to replace the SVD. And yet, the old rifle will not leave. In Ukraine right now, Dragunovs are fighting on both sides of the same war, 60 years after adoption, often wearing the same PSO 1 pattern optic they wore in 1963. And in America, the story has one last twist, because the country that spent 50 years dismissing the SVD is now the country where it is most impossible to own. Genuine Russian Dragunovs were only ever imported in tiny numbers before the import bans slammed shut. First in 1989, then tighter in 2012, then completely after 2014. A single shipment of about 500 full-pattern rifles, a couple of thousand of the civilian Tiger variant, and that was all there would ever be. Today, fewer than a few hundred verified Russian originals exist in American civilian hands, and a real one brings well over $10,000. A clean Tiger, $12,000 to $18,000. The rifle built in the millions for the price of a factory worker's month is, in the United States, rarer and costlier than a best-grade London shotgun. The collectors got the last laugh on the analysts. Step back and look at the whole shape of it. A wartime armorer who learned how rifles break becomes a target rifle champion, who learns how rifles hit and builds a weapon out of both halves of his life. He beats the most famous designer in the Soviet Union in a 5-year trial. He puts match rifle bones inside an infantry rifle's body, tops it with the best standard issue optic on Earth, chambers it for a cartridge from the age of the Tsars, and then, with a target shooter's supreme self-discipline, refuses to make it any more accurate than war actually requires. His rifle arms every platoon of half the world for 60 years. The most powerful alliance in history studies it, scorns it, and then, pinned down in the valleys of Afghanistan, quietly rebuilds its entire infantry doctrine around the idea, half a century late. They mocked its accuracy. They banned its import. They finally copied its purpose. And still, somewhere tonight, in Ukraine, in Africa, in a dozen wars that never make the news, a soldier is lying behind a long, slim rifle designed before his grandfather was born, watching a man-sized shape against the stadia lines of a PSO-1, 600 meters out. The rifle NATO could never copy. still doing the one thing Yevgeny Dragunov built it to do. Reaching out, first, fast, and far enough, everywhere, forever. If you enjoyed the story of the sniper rifle NATO could never copy, subscribe to the channel so you do not miss the next one. We will see you in the next one.